I'm Jordan Mitchell, 29 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been invisible in my own family. My younger sister Victoria, 3 years my junior, has always been the star of the Mitchell household. Everything she touched turned to gold in my parents' eyes. She became a real estate agent at 23, sold her first $1 million home at 24, and by 25 she'd snagged Derek Lawson, a corporate attorney whose family owned half the commercial properties in Springfield, Illinois. Meanwhile, I spent my 20s building a modest graphic design studio, working 70-hour weeks to keep my head above water, and somehow that was never enough. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My mother Barbara would look at my portfolio with a tight smile, her lips pressed thin as she flipped through pages of logos and brand identities I'd created. Then she'd set it down without a word and ask if I'd seen Victoria's latest commission check. My father Robert would nod along, sipping his evening bourbon, never quite meeting my eyes. They had a favorite and it wasn't me. I should have seen what was coming. I should have known that when Victoria announced her engagement to Derek at Sunday dinner, the fallout would land squarely on my shoulders. But I didn't. I actually thought maybe this time, just maybe, they'd see me as part of the family celebration instead of the help. The words my mother said 2 nights ago still ring in my ears like a bell that won't stop tolling. We were sitting around the same mahogany dining table where we'd shared 1,000 meals, the one my grandfather built by hand in 1953. Victoria was going through her seating chart for the 100th time, moving place cards around like chess pieces. Derek sat beside her, checking his phone with the detached air of someone who'd heard all this before. My father was at the head of the table, pretending to read the newspaper but really just hiding behind it. And my mother, Barbara Mitchell, sat across from me with that look she gets when she's about to say something she thinks is perfectly reasonable but is actually a grenade. Victoria had just announced she wanted to change the entire color scheme 3 weeks before the wedding, from sage green and ivory to blush pink and gold. I'd already coordinated with the florist, the decorator, and the rental company. I'd spent hours on the phone. I'd put down deposits. I'd created an entire visual brand guide for her wedding that any professional planner would charge thousands for. And I'd done it for free because she's my sister. When I gently suggested that changing everything now might be complicated and expensive, Victoria's face crumpled like I'd slapped her. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. That's when she said it. Jordan, honestly, maybe the greatest gift you could give your sister on her wedding day is to just not be there. The room went silent. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to stop ticking. My father lowered his newspaper an inch, then thought better of it and raised it back up. Derek shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Victoria looked down at her place card arrangements, not meeting my eyes. My mother continued, her voice taking on that reasonable tone she uses when she's being particularly cruel. You always make everything so difficult. Victoria deserves one perfect day without your negativity bringing down the whole atmosphere. Maybe it's better if you just stayed home. Let the adults handle the important things. I'm 29 years old. I have a college degree. I run my own business. And my mother just called me too incompetent and toxic to attend my own sister's wedding. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, feeling something crack open inside my chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, clearer, like a fog lifting to reveal a landscape I'd been walking through blind my entire life. I asked her if she was serious. She nodded, dabbing her mouth with her napkin as if we were discussing the weather. Completely serious, sweetheart. I think it's what's best for everyone. My father still said nothing. Victoria finally looked up, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt maybe, or recognition that our mother had finally gone too far. But then Derek put his hand over hers, and whatever that flicker was, it died. She turned back to her place cards. I stood up from that table, pushed my chair in carefully, and walked out of my childhood home. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just left. And as I drove back to my small apartment on the east side of Springfield, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Now let me take you back 5 years because you need to understand how deep this pattern runs. Back then, I was 24 and hungry to prove myself. I just graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in graphic design, and a portfolio that had won 3 student awards. I'd landed an interview with a tech startup in Chicago, a company called Streamline Solutions that was revolutionizing project management software. They wanted a complete rebrand, everything from their logo to their app interface to their marketing materials. The contract was worth $50,000, paid out over 6 months. It was the kind of opportunity that could launch a career. I was supposed to sign the papers on a Tuesday in March. That Monday night, my father called. His voice was different, hollow in a way I'd never heard before. He told me the family business, Mitchell's Home and Garden Supply, was in trouble. Bad trouble. The store had been a Springfield institution since 1972, started by my grandfather Mitchell when he came back from Vietnam with a Purple Heart and a dream of building something that would last. For 40 years, it had been the place people went for everything from lawnmowers to paint to garden supplies. But big box stores had moved into the area. Home Depot opened on the north side. Lowe's built a superstore on Route 55. Our customer base had been hemorrhaging for 3 years, and my parents, who'd taken over the business when my grandfather retired, had no idea how to compete. They'd taken out loans to keep the doors open. They'd burned through their retirement savings. They were 8 months behind on payments to their main suppliers. The bank was talking foreclosure. My father's voice cracked when he told me they might lose everything my grandfather built. I was their daughter. What was I supposed to do? I called the Streamline Solutions CEO the next morning and told him I couldn't take the contract. He was disappointed but professional, said he understood family emergencies. He hired someone else within a week. I never got another shot at a client that size. Instead, I moved back to Springfield and threw myself into saving Mitchell's Home and Garden Supply. I spent 3 months doing market research, competitive analysis, customer surveys. I redesigned the entire store layout to be more intuitive and welcoming. I created a new logo, a modern take on my grandfather's original design that honored the history while signaling we'd moved into the 21st century. I built a website from scratch with e-commerce capabilities. I negotiated with suppliers to get us better rates and extended payment terms. I launched a social media campaign highlighting our expertise in personal service, the things the big boxes couldn't offer. I produced video tutorials on lawn care and home repair featuring our staff, turning them into local celebrities. I organized weekend workshops where customers could learn skills like building raised garden beds or installing ceiling fans. I created a loyalty program that rewarded repeat customers. I designed every flyer, every email, every advertisement. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I maxed out 2 credit cards buying Facebook ads and Google AdWords. I burned through my savings paying for professional photography of the store. And it worked. Within 6 months, foot traffic was up 40%. Online orders were coming in from all over central Illinois. We'd paid off 2 of the major supplier debts and were current on the rest. The store's monthly revenue had increased from $43,000 to $78,000. We were profitable for the first time in 4 years. Local news did a story on our turnaround, calling it a small business success story. I thought finally my parents would see me. They'd understand what I'd sacrificed, what I'd accomplished. They'd look at me the way they looked at Victoria when she closed a big sale. That's not what happened. On a Sunday in November, my parents called a family meeting at the store. Victoria drove in from her condo downtown. I arrived tired but hopeful, carrying a presentation I prepared about next steps for growing the business. We gathered in the back office, the same cramped room where my grandfather used to do payroll by hand. My mother preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My mother sat behind the desk. My father stood by the filing cabinet. Victoria perched on the old leather couch, scrolling through her phone. My mother cleared her throat and announced they'd made a decision about the store's future. They were putting Victoria in charge as general manager. My sister looked up from her phone, surprised. "Mom, I don't know anything about running a hardware store. I sell houses." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "You're a natural businesswoman, sweetie. You understand sales and customer service. You'll pick it up in no time. Besides, Jordan can stay on to help with the day-to-day stuff. You'll be the face of the business." My father nodded along, finally speaking up. "You've got the personality for it, Vicky. People respond to you. It makes sense. I sat there holding my presentation folder, the one filled with 12 months of strategy I planned out, and I felt something inside me go numb. I'd saved this business. I'd pulled it back from the edge of bankruptcy with my own hands, my own money, my own sleepless nights. And they were handing it to Victoria like a participation trophy. Victoria, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. She shifted on the couch and said maybe Jordan should keep running things since she knew what she was doing. My mother's expression hardened. Jordan's done fine with the basics, but we need someone with real business instincts to take us to the next level. Someone clients will respect and want to work with. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't respectable enough. I wasn't polished enough. I wasn't Victoria. I asked what role they saw for me. My father finally looked at me directly and said I could stay on as marketing coordinator, reporting to Victoria. All my decisions would need her approval. I'd get a modest salary, $28,000 a year. Less than I'd been making freelancing before I gave it all up to save them. Victoria would get $55,000 plus bonuses tied to revenue I'd generated. My mother added that this was a great opportunity for me to learn from Victoria's leadership style. I should be grateful they were keeping me involved at all. I stood up, set my presentation folder on the desk, and told them I needed to think about it. My mother's face pinched. There's nothing to think about, Jordan. This is what's best for the family business. I walked out without another word. I never went back to work at that store. I rebuilt my freelance design studio from nothing, working out of my apartment, taking any client I could get. Small businesses, local nonprofits, the occasional wedding invitation. I made enough to cover rent and groceries. I told myself I was done trying to earn their approval. But I wasn't, not really. Because when Victoria got engaged 18 months ago, when she showed me her ring and asked me to help plan the wedding, I said yes. I said yes because she's my sister. I said yes because some stupid part of me still hoped that if I could give her the perfect wedding, if I could prove myself one more time, maybe things would be different. I spent 6 months planning every detail. I created a complete visual identity for the wedding, designing the invitations, the programs, the menus, the signage, everything. I coordinated with the venue, Riverside Manor, an upscale event space overlooking the Illinois River. I met with florists and caterers and photographers. I built a wedding website. I organized the bridal shower and helped plan the bachelorette party. And yes, I paid for a significant chunk of it. $12,000 from my savings, money I'd scraped together doing freelance work, because my parents said Victoria and Derek deserved the best and the wedding budget was already stretched thin. Would I mind covering the photography and the videography? They were only $8,000 combined, and I was so good at finding deals. And maybe the rehearsal dinner too, since I knew the perfect restaurant. That was another $4,000. I put it all on my credit card and told myself it was an investment in family harmony. Victoria's demands started small. She wanted calligraphy place cards instead of printed ones. She wanted uplighting in the reception hall to match the blush and gold color scheme. She wanted a champagne tower instead of regular service. I made it happen. I found vendors, negotiated prices, and managed timelines. But then the requests got bigger. She wanted a live band instead of a DJ, a 12-piece ensemble that cost $6,000. She wanted all the linens imported from Italy, specialty fabric that cost $150 per table. She wanted the flowers to be specific varieties shipped in from specialty growers, not the perfectly lovely local options I'd sourced. She wanted an ice sculpture of 2 swans for the cocktail hour. She wanted the cake to have edible gold leaf and sugar flowers that each took an hour to make by hand. Every time I gently suggested an alternative to save money or stay on schedule, she'd get this wounded look. My mother would swoop in and tell me I was being unsupportive. My father would remind me that weddings only happen once, implying I was too cheap and small-minded to understand. Derek stayed mostly quiet, but I could tell he thought I was the problem too. The reasonable one trying to ruin everyone's fun with practicality and budgets. 3 weeks before the wedding, Victoria announced she wanted to change the entire color scheme. Sage green and ivory were out. Blush pink and gold were in. Never mind that I'd already ordered linens, flowers, bridesmaid dresses in sage, invitations, programs, and decorations. Never mind that changing everything now would cost thousands more and require round-the-clock coordination with vendors who were already locked into their schedules. She'd seen a wedding on social media that looked more romantic, more her. And she wanted that instead. She wanted me to make it happen. When I explained that it would be nearly impossible and definitely expensive, that we'd lose deposits and have to pay rush fees, she burst into tears. My mother put her arm around Victoria and glared at me like I'd physically hurt her. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," my mother said. "You can't just be happy for your sister. You have to make everything complicated and stressful." My father shook his head and muttered that I'd always had a negative attitude. Victoria sobbed that she just wanted one day to be perfect, and I was ruining it before it even happened. That's when my mother suggested maybe I shouldn't come to the wedding. The gift of my absence. I went home that night and sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by binders full of wedding plans, spreadsheets tracking expenses, and vendor contracts with my signature on them. I looked at my bank account, nearly drained. I looked at my calendar, blank of any paying work because I blocked out 6 months to focus on Victoria's wedding. I looked at my phone, waiting for an apology that would never come. And I realized something. I was done. Not just with the wedding. With all of it. With being the family workhorse who got no recognition. With sacrificing my dreams and my money and my time for people who would never see me as anything but a convenient tool. With hoping that someday, somehow I'd finally be enough. I'd spent 29 years trying to earn my parents' love, and they just told me the best thing I could do was disappear. Fine. I'd disappear. But not the way they wanted. The next morning I woke up with perfect clarity. I made coffee, opened my laptop and started making phone calls. First, I called the photographer I'd hired for Victoria's wedding, a talented guy named Marcus Chun who owed me a favor from a previous project. I explained that I needed to cancel the booking and get my $4,000 deposit back. He was confused, asked if everything was okay. I told him the truth. The bride's family had uninvited me from the wedding, and I was no longer funding any portion of it. He was quiet for a moment, then said he understood and he'd process the refund immediately. He also said he thought I deserved better, which made my eyes sting with tears I refused to shed. Next, I called the videographer. Same conversation, same result. $3,000 deposit back in my account. Then the florist. The centerpieces, bouquets, and ceremony arrangements I'd paid for, all canceled. Another $2,000 refunded. The restaurant where I'd booked the rehearsal dinner, canceled. $4,000 back. The calligrapher who was hand-lettering all the place cards. The lighting company providing the uplighting. The company making the custom cake topper I'd designed. One by one, I called every vendor I'd personally paid, explained the situation without dramatics or emotion, and requested refunds. Most were understanding. A few were annoyed about the late cancellation, but I didn't care. By noon, I'd recovered $11,000 of the $12,000 I'd put into Victoria's wedding. The only loss was some non-refundable deposits, but even those I fought for, citing breach of contract and changed circumstances. Then I did something that felt even better. I called the family business, Mitchell's Home and Garden Supply. My father answered, his voice gruff and distracted. I told him I wanted to withdraw my investment from the store. There was a long silence. "What investment?" he said. "You were an employee." I reminded him that 5 years ago, when I was saving the business, I'd put $8,000 of my own money into inventory upgrades and the website development. We'd verbally agreed it was an investment, that I'd be paid back once the business stabilized. He tried to argue that it had been a gift, that family doesn't keep score. I told him I had emails documenting the agreement, and if he didn't return my $8,000 within a week, I'd pursue it legally. He sputtered, said I was being vindictive and petty. I told him I'd see the money by Friday and hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. I spent the rest of that day researching. I looked up apartment rentals in cities far from Springfield. I looked at the balance in my business account from selling a few assets and recovering the wedding money. I looked at job boards and freelance opportunities. I looked at places where nobody knew the Mitchell family, where I could start fresh without the weight of their expectations crushing me. By evening, I'd made a decision. I was leaving Springfield. Not next month or next year. Now. Within a week. I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Exit Strategy. I listed everything I needed to do. Sell my furniture. Break my apartment lease. Pack what mattered. Find a new city. Build a new life. Become someone other than the Mitchell family disappointment. I thought about where to go, flipping through possibilities like cards in a deck. Somewhere different. Somewhere beautiful. Somewhere I could breathe. Burlington, Vermont kept coming up in my searches. A small city on Lake Champlain with mountains nearby and a thriving arts community. Progressive politics, good coffee shops, and a reputation for welcoming people who needed a fresh start. The cost of living was higher than Springfield, but I'd have almost $50,000 once I sold my design studio assets and collected what I was owed. That would give me a runway to rebuild. I bought a one-way bus ticket for the following Tuesday. Then I started selling everything I owned that wouldn't fit in 2 suitcases. The week between my decision and Victoria's wedding passed in a strange blur of methodical destruction and cold efficiency. I didn't sleep much, but I wasn't tired. I felt sharp, focused, like I'd been living underwater my whole life and had finally broken the surface. Every item I sold, every tie I cut, every bridge I burned felt like shedding weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. I listed my furniture on local marketplace sites and watched it disappear piece by piece. The couch I'd saved 3 months to buy went to a college student for $200. My dining table, the one I'd refinished myself, sold to a young couple for $150. My bed frame, my bookshelves, my kitchen table, all gone. I kept only what would fit in 2 large suitcases and a backpack. Clothes, laptop, external hard drive with my design files, a few books I couldn't part with, and my camera. Everything else was just stuff, and stuff had never made me happy anyway. My landlord wasn't thrilled about breaking the lease 4 months early. But when I offered to forfeit my security deposit and find a replacement tenant, he agreed. I had someone lined up within 48 hours. A nurse moving to Springfield for a hospital job who was desperate for a place. I spent 2 days deep cleaning the apartment until it looked better than when I'd moved in, erasing every trace of my existence from those walls. Tyler, my best friend since our freshman year at University of Illinois, came over on Thursday night. He brought pizza and beer and sat on my nearly empty living room floor looking at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're really doing this," he said. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I'm really doing this." He took a long pull from his beer and asked if I was sure, if maybe I was acting rashly, if I'd regret cutting off my family so completely. I told him about the dinner, about my mother's words, about spending 5 years and $12,000 trying to earn a scrap of recognition that would never come. I told him I'd finally realized I was waiting for people to see me who had chosen blindness, and that was a losing game I was done playing. Tyler nodded slowly, then raised his beer. "To new beginnings and to families we choose instead of families we're born into." We clinked bottles, and for the first time since Sunday dinner, I felt something warm in my chest. Not quite happiness, but close. Relief maybe, or hope. Friday morning my father's check arrived via overnight mail. $8,000, the exact amount I'd demanded, with no note and no apology. Just a check with his angry, slanted signature. I deposited it immediately and watched my account balance climb. Between the wedding refunds, the furniture sales, the lease deposit forfeit offset by what I'd recovered, and now this, I had $47,000. It was more money than I'd ever had at one time, and it felt like freedom in numerical form. I spent Friday afternoon at my bank, closing my local accounts and opening new ones with a national chain that had branches in Vermont. I updated my business information, changed my address to a temporary mail forwarding service, and filed the paperwork to dissolve my Illinois business registration. Jordan Mitchell Designs, the scrappy little studio I'd built from nothing, was being packed up and moved like everything else. Saturday, the day before Victoria's wedding, I drove to the commercial storage facility where I kept my design equipment and supplies. Backup hard drives, a professional printer, boxes of paper samples, old client files, all of it got sorted into keep, sell, or trash. I listed the printer and some other equipment online and had buyers lined up within hours. By evening, I'd condensed my entire professional life into 2 boxes that would ship to my new address once I had one. I didn't hear from my family all week. Not my mother, not my father, not Victoria. The silence was its own form of communication. They'd meant what they said. I was not wanted, not missed, not worth a second thought. Good. That made what was coming easier. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Perfect wedding weather. I woke up at 6 in my sleeping bag on the floor of my empty apartment, my packed suitcases lined up by the door like soldiers awaiting orders. My bus to Burlington didn't leave until Tuesday, but I'd already checked out mentally. I made coffee in the one mug I hadn't packed yet, sat on the floor with my laptop and waited. I knew what was going to happen at Riverside Manor. I'd planned every detail of that wedding for 6 months. I knew the timeline down to the minute. 9 in the morning, the venue staff would arrive to start setting up. 9:30, the florist would deliver the arrangements. 10 o'clock, the catering team would begin prep in the kitchen. 11, the photographer and videographer would arrive to capture getting ready photos. Noon, guests would start arriving for the 1 o'clock ceremony. Except none of that was going to happen because I'd canceled everything I'd paid for. The florist wasn't coming. The photographer wasn't coming. The videographer wasn't coming. The rehearsal dinner restaurant had no record of Friday night's reservation. The calligrapher never finished the place cards. The lighting company wasn't bringing up lighting. Half the wedding that Victoria and my parents had taken for granted, the half I'd funded and organized, simply didn't exist anymore. My phone started ringing at 9:15. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 9:20. Again at 9:25. I turned off my phone and poured another cup of coffee, imagining the scene at Riverside Manor with perfect clarity. Victoria would be in the bridal suite, probably already in her dress, surrounded by her bridesmaids. My mother would be fluttering around giving orders. My father would be glad handing early arriving guests. And then someone from the venue would approach, confused, saying the florist was supposed to be there an hour ago. My mother would call the florist, who would politely explain that the order had been canceled by Jordan Mitchell, the person who'd booked and paid for it, and they had no record of any other payment arrangement. Then someone would notice the photographer hadn't arrived. More calls. More confusion. The realization slowly dawning that large chunks of the wedding had simply vanished. I sat in my empty apartment drinking coffee and feeling nothing but a calm, cold satisfaction. They told me the best gift I could give was my absence. I'd given them exactly that, and I'd taken my contributions with me. Around 11 I turned my phone back on. 43 missed calls. 17 voicemails. 32 text messages. I didn't listen to the voicemails, but I scrolled through the texts, watching the tone escalate from confused to angry to desperate. My mother's first message, sent at 9:18, was almost polite. Jordan, the florist says you canceled? Please call me, there must be a mistake. By 10:30, the politeness had evaporated. What have you done? Call me immediately. This is not funny. My father's texts were shorter and angrier. Fix this now. You're embarrassing the whole family. Victoria's messages were the most interesting. The first one, sent at 10:15, said, Jordan, please tell me this is a misunderstanding. The second, 10 minutes later, said, I'm sorry about what Mom said. Please don't do this. The third, sent at 11, was just crying emojis and the word please repeated 6 times. I felt a tiny twinge of something for my sister. Not quite guilt, but recognition that she was caught in the blast radius of a bomb she hadn't personally armed. But then I remembered her sitting at that dinner table, saying nothing while our mother told me to disappear. I remembered her accepting the family business I'd saved, accepting the wedding I'd planned, accepting every advantage that came from treating me like hired help instead of family. The twinge faded. She'd made her choices too. Derek, Victoria's fiancé, sent me a text at 11:30 that made me laugh out loud. This is extremely unprofessional and you'll be hearing from my lawyer. I screenshot it and saved it, thinking that would be an interesting lawsuit. Man sues his fiancé's sister for canceling services she personally paid for after being disinvited from the wedding. I'd love to see him try to argue that case. Tyler texted me around noon asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. I told him I was perfect and asked him to drive by Riverside Manor and report back. 20 minutes later, he sent me a message that made me smile for the first time in a week. It's absolute chaos. Half the decorations are missing, no flowers anywhere. Bride is crying. Mother of the bride is screaming at venue staff. Father of the bride looks like he's going to have a heart attack. Guests are standing around looking confused. I've never seen anything like it. He included a photo he'd sneaked from the parking lot. I could see guests in their formal wear clustered near the entrance looking bewildered. And through the window, I could just make out my mother's distinctive purple dress as she gestured wildly at someone. It was beautiful. The ceremony, I learned later through Tyler's play-by-play texts, did eventually happen. They found a Bluetooth speaker and played a tinny version of the wedding march from someone's phone. Victoria walked down an aisle with no flowers, no decorations, just empty space and confused guests. There was no photographer to capture it, no videographer to record the vows. My mother had apparently tried to get guests to take pictures with their phones, but the angles were bad and the lighting worse. The reception was even more of a disaster. The tables had basic linens, not the Italian imports Victoria wanted. The centerpieces were last-minute grocery store bouquets that my father had apparently driven across town to buy in a panic, mismatched and wilting. The menu was whatever the venue's in-house catering could throw together on 3 hours' notice, basic chicken and potatoes instead of the elaborate meal I'd arranged. There was no specialty lighting, no ice sculpture, no champagne tower. The cake was plain white buttercream from a grocery store bakery with Happy Wedding written in shaky script. Nothing like the 4-tier masterpiece with sugar flowers and gold leaf that I'd commissioned. Tyler sent me photos throughout the afternoon. Screenshots from guests who were posting on social media with barely concealed mockery. One guest had posted a picture of the grocery store cake with the caption, "When you spend all your money on the dress, and forget about everything else." Another had shared a photo of the empty ceremony aisle with not quite what the invitation promised. The comments were brutal. People asking what happened if the wedding planner had quit, if the family had run out of money. Someone who apparently knew my family mentioned that the bride's sister had been planning everything and wondered where she was. My mother, according to Tyler's intel, told people I'd had a mental health emergency and couldn't be there. She tried to paint me as unstable, unreliable, the reason things had fallen apart. But enough people knew enough pieces of the truth that the narrative didn't quite stick. Whispers circulated. The sister was supposed to be here. The sister paid for a bunch of stuff and then canceled it. The sister was uninvited. Did you hear what the mother said to her? By evening, the wedding had become less of a celebration and more of a spectacle, something people would talk about for years, but not in the way Victoria had hoped. I spent Sunday evening packing the last of my belongings and eating takeout on the floor. My phone continued to ring and buzz with messages I didn't read. The sun set over Springfield, painting the sky orange and purple, and I watched it from my empty apartment window feeling lighter than I had in a decade. This city, this family, this life, it was all in my rearview mirror now. Tuesday morning, I'd board a bus and leave it all behind. For now, I let myself sit in the satisfaction of a job well done. They'd wanted me gone and I'd gone, but on my terms. Not as the family disappointment slinking away in shame, but as someone who finally understood her worth and refused to accept less. Monday was my last full day in Springfield. I spent the morning closing out the final details, returning my apartment keys, making a last trip to the post office to forward my mail, filling my car with gas for the drive to the bus station. I'd sold my car to a coworker of Tyler's who needed reliable transportation. It wasn't worth much. An aging sedan with 140,000 miles, but I got $1,500 for it. Every dollar counted now. I met Tyler for lunch at the diner where we'd spent countless hours during college, splitting cheese fries and complaining about professors and dreaming about the future. The future had turned out differently than we'd imagined, but here we were, still splitting cheese fries. He looked at me across the table with something like admiration mixed with concern. "You're really not going to talk to them again," he said. "Not planning on it," I told him. Tyler had never particularly liked my family. He'd been around for too many family dinners where I was ignored or criticized. Too many holidays where my accomplishments were brushed aside while Victoria's were celebrated. He'd once told me, after a particularly brutal Thanksgiving, that my family treated me like an unpaid intern in my own life. He wasn't wrong. "But you're okay?" he asked. "Not going to regret this in 6 months and wish you could take it back?" I thought about it, really thought about it. Was there a part of me that hoped my mother would call and apologize? That my father would recognize what he'd lost? That Victoria would stand up for me? Maybe a small part, some vestigial organ of hope that hadn't quite died. But the larger, louder part of me knew the truth. They'd had 29 years to see me, and they'd chosen not to. One more chance wouldn't change anything. I told Tyler I was sure, and I meant it. We talked about Burlington, about my plans to rebuild my design business, about the relief I felt at starting over somewhere nobody knew me as the lesser Mitchell daughter. Tyler made me promise to stay in touch, to call him when I got settled, to let him visit once I had furniture. Again, I promised, knowing I'd keep it. Tyler was family in the way that mattered, chosen and earned, not biological obligation. We finished our fries and hugged in the parking lot, and he told me he was proud of me. That almost broke me, hearing those words from someone who meant them. I drove away with my eyes stinging but my resolve firm. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off. I logged into my email and composed 3 messages. The first was to my mother. It was short, clinical, empty of emotion. Barbara, I received your voicemails and texts regarding Victoria's wedding. As you requested, I was not in attendance. Additionally, I canceled all services I had personally funded, as I was no longer willing to finance an event I was not welcome to attend. I am leaving Springfield and will not be returning. Please do not contact me again. Jordan. The second was to my father, equally brief. Robert, your check arrived. Consider all financial obligations between us settled. I am leaving Illinois and do not wish to maintain contact. Do not call or email. Jordan. The third was to Victoria. This one I struggled with more, my fingers hovering over the keyboard for long minutes before I typed. Victoria, I hope your wedding day, despite the complications, marked the beginning of a happy marriage. I will not be part of your life going forward. This is not about punishment, but about protecting myself from a family dynamic that has never valued me. I wish you well, but from a distance. Please respect my decision and do not attempt to reach out. Jordan. I hit send on all 3 before I could second-guess myself, then I blocked their email addresses, their phone numbers, and their social media profiles. The digital severing was swift and thorough. They no longer existed in my world, and I no longer existed in theirs. It was clean, final, and necessary. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that makes you believe in new beginnings. The air was crisp but not cold, the sky cloudless, the leaves just starting to turn yellow and red. I dressed in comfortable clothes for the bus ride, jeans and a sweater, sneakers meant for walking. I looked around my empty apartment one last time, checking closets and cabinets to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. The place echoed with emptiness, already feeling like it belonged to someone else. I'd spent 3 years here, and now there was no trace of me left. I liked it that way. Tyler picked me up at 8 to drive me to the bus station. We didn't talk much during the drive, just listened to music and watched Springfield roll past the windows. The downtown where I'd landed my first freelance client. The park where I used to sketch on lunch breaks. The coffee shop where I'd spent countless hours working on designs. The street where Mitchell's Home and Garden Supply sat, its parking lot half empty on a Tuesday morning. I didn't ask Tyler to slow down. I didn't look back. The bus station was a small, tired building on the edge of town, the kind of place people only visited when they were leaving and not planning to return. I checked my bags, got my ticket validated, and waited in the uncomfortable plastic chairs with Tyler sitting beside me. He'd taken a personal day from his teaching job to see me off, and I was grateful for it. When they called my bus, I stood and hugged him hard. Thank you for believing in me when my own family didn't, I told him. He squeezed me tighter and said that was easy because I was worth believing in. Then I grabbed my backpack, got in line and boarded the bus that would take me away from Springfield forever. The bus pulled out at 9:45, right on schedule. I found a window seat near the back, stowed my backpack, and watched as Springfield grew smaller behind me. Houses gave way to strip malls gave way to farmland gave way to highway stretches of nothing but trees and sky. I felt the tension I'd been carrying in my shoulders for years begin to ease. Every mile was a mile away from expectation and disappointment. Every mile was a mile toward possibility. The bus ride to Burlington would take 14 hours with stops and transfers. I had a book, my laptop with downloaded movies, and a playlist of music for every mood. But mostly I just stared out the window and let my mind wander. I thought about what I'd left behind, not with regret but with a strange sort of curiosity. What would happen to my family now? Would they finally recognize what I'd contributed? Or would they rewrite history to make me the villain who sabotaged Victoria's wedding out of spite? Would the family business survive without my investment and eventual management? Or would it slowly decline until my parents had to sell? Would Victoria's marriage to Derek last? Or would the cracks that showed when things got difficult widen into chasms? I'd never know the answers to those questions, and I realized I didn't need to. Their story was no longer my story. I was writing a new one. The bus stopped in Indianapolis for lunch, and I grabbed a sandwich from a sad little shop in the station. I ate it sitting on a bench outside watching other travelers come and go, each with their own story, their own destination, their own reasons for being in motion. An elderly woman asked me where I was headed, and when I told her Burlington, she smiled and said she'd visited once and thought it was lovely. "I hope you find what you're looking for there," she said. I told her I thought I would. Back on the bus through Indiana and into Ohio, I pulled out my laptop and started making lists. Things I needed to do once I arrived in Burlington. Find an apartment, something small and affordable in a good neighborhood. Register my business in Vermont. Update my portfolio website. Reach out to potential clients. Join local business groups. Find a coffee shop to work from. Buy furniture. Build a life. The list grew longer as the miles passed, and instead of feeling overwhelming, it felt exciting. Every item was something I got to choose, got to control, got to build exactly the way I wanted without anyone telling me I was doing it wrong or asking why I couldn't be more like someone else. As the sun began to set somewhere over Pennsylvania, I pulled out a notebook and started sketching logo ideas. Not for a client, just for practice, for pleasure. I'd forgotten what it felt like to create something just because I wanted to, without the pressure of needing it to impress anyone. The designs flowed easily, my pen moving across the page in sure strokes, and I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy in doing something I was good at just for the sake of doing it. By the time we crossed into New York, it was fully dark outside, and the bus was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional snore from another passenger. I leaned my head against the window and watched the lights of small towns flash past, each one a collection of lives I'd never know, people I'd never meet, all of us moving through our own stories. I thought about Jordan Mitchell, 29 years old, who'd spent her whole life trying to be seen by people determined to look past her. And I thought about the Jordan Mitchell I was becoming, the one who didn't need anyone's permission to exist fully and loudly in her own life. That Jordan was going to be just fine. We pulled into the Burlington bus station just after midnight. I stepped off the bus into cool mountain air that smelled like pine and lake water and possibility. My legs were stiff from sitting, my eyes tired from the long day, but I felt awake in every other way. I collected my suitcases from the luggage compartment and stood in the parking lot of the small station, looking up at a sky full of stars you could never see in Springfield. This was it. My fresh start. My new beginning. My life on my own terms. I pulled out my phone and opened the email confirmation for the extended stay motel I'd booked for my first week. A cheap but clean place that would give me time to apartment hunt. The address was only 2 miles away. I could walk it, I decided, dragging my suitcases behind me through the quiet streets of downtown Burlington. The exercise would do me good, and I wanted to see my new city, even in the dark, even exhausted. I wanted to claim it step by step. As I walked through the empty streets, past closed shops and dark windows, past the occasional person walking a dog or heading home from a late shift, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of the constant low-level anxiety that had followed me through every interaction with my family. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I wasn't bracing for criticism. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was just walking, just existing, just being Jordan without any qualifiers or comparisons. The motel appeared after 20 minutes of walking. A 2-story building with a flickering vacancy sign and a parking lot half full of cars. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned and saved and fought to keep. I checked in with a sleepy clerk who barely looked at me, took my key and found my room on the 2nd floor. It was small, just a bed and a TV and a tiny bathroom, but it had a window that looked out over the street and the mountains beyond. I dropped my suitcases, kicked off my shoes, and stood at that window for a long time, looking out at Burlington sleeping under its blanket of stars. Somewhere back in Springfield, my family was probably still dealing with the aftermath of the wedding. My mother was probably still angry, my father still disappointed, Victoria still confused about how things had gone so wrong. They were probably talking about me, blaming me, making me the villain of their story. And I realized, standing in that motel room in Vermont, that I didn't care. Let them tell whatever story they needed to tell. I knew the truth, and that was enough. I pulled out my phone and sent Tyler a text. Made it to Burlington. Starting my new life tomorrow. Thank you for everything. His response came immediately. even though it was past midnight his time. Proud of you. Go be amazing. I plugged in my phone to charge, brushed my teeth, and climbed into the surprisingly comfortable motel bed. I was asleep in minutes, the kind of deep, dreamless sleep that comes from knowing you've made the right choice, even if it was the hardest one. Tomorrow I'd start building. Tonight I'd rest. I woke up in Burlington on my first full morning to sunlight streaming through thin motel curtains, and the sound of traffic building on the street below. For a moment I forgot where I was, that disorienting feeling of waking in an unfamiliar place. Then it all came back, the bus ride, the decision, the clean break from everything I'd known. I stretched in the narrow bed and felt something I hadn't felt in years, excitement about the day ahead. Not dread, not anxiety, just pure anticipation for what came next. After a quick shower in the cramped motel bathroom, I dressed and walked to a diner I'd spotted the night before, a classic aluminum-sided place called Penny's with a neon sign and steamed-up windows. Inside, it smelled like coffee and bacon and maple syrup, that perfect breakfast combination that makes everything feel possible. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered the special 2 eggs over easy toast, home fries, and endless coffee. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements, kept my cup filled without me having to ask. I pulled out my notebook and started making a plan for the day. First priority was finding a real apartment, something I could sign a lease on and start making into a home. Second was getting a feel for the city, walking the neighborhoods, finding the coffee shops and co-working spaces where I could set up my laptop and start working. Third was beginning the process of rebuilding my client base, reaching out to my network, updating my portfolio, and letting people know I was open for business in a new location. I spent that first day walking Burlington from end to end, getting a sense of the city's rhythm and personality. Downtown was compact and walkable, brick buildings housing independent bookstores and coffee roasters and vintage clothing shops. Church Street was a pedestrian marketplace buzzing with activity even on a Wednesday morning, street musicians playing guitar for spare change, vendors selling handmade jewelry, college students from the University of Vermont hurrying between classes with backpacks slung over their shoulders. The lake was visible from half the streets, Lake Champlain stretching out blue and vast with the Adirondacks rising purple in the distance across the water. The air tasted clean in a way Springfield's never had, mountain air mixed with lake breeze, and I found myself breathing deeper just because I could. I walked through the Old North End, a neighborhood of colorful Victorian houses and corner markets with signs in multiple languages. I walked through the South End, the arts district with galleries and makerspaces and a food truck park that smelled incredible, even though it was barely noon. I walked along the bike path that traced the waterfront, watching kayakers and cyclists and people walking their dogs, everyone seeming relaxed and unhurried in a way that felt foreign after years in the Midwest. By mid-afternoon, my feet hurt and my phone was full of photos of apartment buildings and storefronts and street corners I wanted to remember. I stopped at a coffee shop called Muddy Waters, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, and ordered an iced coffee and a scone. Most of the apartments in my price range were small studios or one-bedrooms, but that was fine. I didn't need much space. I needed light, a decent internet connection, and proximity to the downtown area where the energy was. I made calls to 3 different landlords and set up viewings for the next day. While I was sitting there, a woman about my age approached my table. She had dark curly hair pulled into a messy bun and paint stains on her jeans. "Excuse me," she said, gesturing to my laptop screen where I had my portfolio website open. "Are you a designer?" I looked up surprised and said yes. She smiled and introduced herself as Melissa Crane, a muralist who was looking for someone to design a logo and business cards for her art business. We talked for 20 minutes about her vision, her style, her budget. I gave her my email and said I'd send her a proposal by the end of the week. Just like that, I had my first Burlington client, found by accident in a coffee shop on my first full day in town. Felt like a sign. The next day I viewed all 3 apartments. The studio above the bike shop was too dark, facing a brick wall with barely any natural light. The converted mill building was beautiful but felt too industrial. All exposed pipes and concrete floors that echoed. The 3rd floor walk-up, though, that one felt right the moment I walked through the door. It was a 1-bedroom in a big old house that had been divided into 4 units, each with its own entrance. The landlord, a retired teacher named Dorothy Walsh, showed me around with obvious pride. The apartment had hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot, large windows that let in floods of afternoon sun, a small kitchen with vintage tile, and a bedroom just big enough for a bed and a dresser. The bathroom had an old clawfoot tub that Dorothy said still worked perfectly. The whole place was painted a warm cream color and smelled faintly of lemon and old wood. Dorothy explained that she'd lived in the house for 30 years before converting it to rentals when her husband passed. She asked me what brought me to Burlington, and I gave her the edited version of Fresh Start, a chance to build my design business in a new city, ready for a change. She nodded like she understood more than I'd said and told me the rent was $1,400 a month, utilities included except electric, lease could start immediately if I wanted it. I said yes before she'd even finished talking. We shook hands right there in the sunny living room, and Dorothy said she'd have the lease ready to sign the next morning. I moved into the apartment 3 days later with my 2 suitcases, my backpack, and my potted succulent. Dorothy helped me carry my bags up the 3 flights of stairs, insisting despite her age that she was stronger than she looked. She gave me a small potted herb plant as a housewarming gift, basil she'd grown herself, and told me if I ever needed anything to just knock on her door. The apartment echoed with emptiness, but it was my emptiness, my space to fill however I wanted. I sat on the hardwood floor of the living room with my back against the wall. This was mine. Nobody had opinions about how I should decorate it. Nobody was going to walk through criticizing my choices or comparing it to someone else's place. It was small and empty and absolutely perfect. Over the next week, I furnished the apartment piece by piece from thrift stores and estate sales. A futon couch from a college student moving away, $75. A small kitchen table and 2 chairs from the Salvation Army, $40. A bed frame and mattress from an estate sale, $200 for both. I hung curtains I found at a fabric store, simple white cotton that filtered the light beautifully. I put up shelves I assembled myself for my books and a few framed prints I bought from local artists at the Church Street Market. By the end of that first week, the apartment had transformed from an empty shell into something that felt lived in and loved. I established a routine quickly. Mornings I'd wake up early and make coffee in my tiny kitchen, standing at the window watching the neighborhood come to life while I planned my day. Then I'd walk to Muddy Waters or one of the other coffee shops downtown, set up my laptop and work. I reached out to my network from Illinois, letting former clients and colleagues know I'd relocated and was taking on new projects. The work came slowly at first, small projects here and there. I designed a menu for a new restaurant in the South End. I created branding for a yoga studio. I did website updates for a bookstore. Each job was modest, a few $100s here and there, but they added up. By the end of my first month in Burlington, I'd made $3,200, enough to cover rent and groceries and even put a little into savings. One Saturday in my second month, I was at the farmer's market browsing the vegetable stands when I literally bumped into someone. My distracted shuffle backward after picking out tomatoes colliding with a woman carrying a box of pastries. The box tilted dangerously but didn't fall, and we both laughed at the near disaster. She introduced herself as Helen Garrett, owner of a coffee roastery and cafe called Garrett's Grind. Helen's face lit up with that particular enthusiasm people have when they love their city and want to share it. She insisted I come by her cafe, said she'd give me a free coffee to make up for almost wearing her pastries. I went to Garrett's Grind the following Tuesday. It was tucked on a quieter street a few blocks from downtown, a brick building with big windows and the rich smell of roasting coffee beans pouring out the door. Inside, it was warm and inviting, all wood and plants and mismatched seating that felt curated rather than haphazard. Helen was behind the counter, and she recognized me immediately, greeting me by name and refusing to let me pay for my latte. We talked while she made my drink, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She asked how I was settling in, what I did for work, whether I'd found my people yet. Helen and I fell into an easy friendship after that. I started working from Garrett's Grind a few days a week, and she'd sit with me during slow afternoon hours, sharing stories about the city and asking about my work. She had a way of listening that made you feel heard, really heard, without judgment or comparison. She was in her late 50s, had opened the cafe 15 years ago after leaving a corporate job in Boston, and understood completely the pull of starting over somewhere new. Through Helen, I met people who needed design work and my client list grew. Through Helen, I found a community that had nothing to do with who my family was or wasn't. 3 months into my Burlington life, I got an email that almost derailed my peace. It was from Victoria, sent from an address I hadn't blocked because I didn't know she had it. The subject line was, "Please read this." Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message was long, rambling, full of apologies and explanations. She said she was sorry about what happened, that Mom had been out of line, that the wedding had been a disaster and she wished I'd been there. She said things had been hard since I left. The family business was struggling again. Mom and Dad were fighting constantly. Her marriage to Derek was already strained. She said she missed me and wanted to fix things, wanted me to come home, or at least call so we could talk. I read the email twice, feeling that old familiar tug of obligation and guilt. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to help, wanted to believe that maybe things could be different. But then I looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built in 3 months, at the peace I'd found in cutting those ties. I closed the email without responding and added Victoria's new address to my blocked list. I felt a pang of sadness, a small mourning for the relationship we'd never really had, but underneath that was relief. I'd chosen myself and I was going to keep choosing myself. That evening, I met Helen at her cafe after she closed, and we sat in the quiet space drinking decaf and talking. I told her about Victoria's email, about the pull I'd felt to respond, about the relief that came from not responding. Helen listened without interrupting. Then she said something that stuck with me. "You know what I learned when I left Boston? That guilt is just programming. It's what we've been taught to feel when we prioritize ourselves. But guilt doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it just means you're doing something different, and different scares the people who benefited from how things were." Helen raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To doing something different," she said. I clinked my cup against hers and repeated the words. To doing something different. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.